us here in Springfield City Hall? Thank you. My name is Sean Curran. I'm Chair of the City Council Subcommittee on Economic Development. And let me introduce Victor Davila, your chair.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here.
And we're also joined by City Councilor Tim Allen. Tim Allen. And we're also joined by Springfield City Solicitor Stephen Bonicani. The reason why we have put this together, this meeting, is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has implemented new legislation mandating ADUs, accessory dwelling units, across the Commonwealth. And obviously here in the City of Holmes, this will have a major impact on our housing and our future housing development. And really just an informational meeting on the powers that be here and here in the city, how we're planning for this, the implementation of ADUs and the implementation of this legislation. And we thought it'd be good to really kick it off and invite city policymakers. And I know we have Phil Dromey here, as well as Ken Shea. Our housing director was also invited, as well as Mr. Desautel from Code Enforcement. So hopefully they'll get on the line shortly, because it would be important to hear from the Director of Housing, Jerry McCafferty, as well as our Code Enforcement Director. And certainly Tim Sheehan was invited as well. So see that we have Phil Dromey here, who's an expert in all things. If you can give us a 10,000-foot overview on where the city is on ADU implementation and what to expect in the next 30 days and where we are.
Well, thank you. I do have a quick presentation. I don't know whether I can share that, which kind of walks through the ADU law that was just passed. The big thing to remind everybody, as was mentioned by Councilor Curran, is this is a state law that was passed back in August through a larger bill that had a number of policy changes in it, this being one of them. Let me just see if I can actually bring this up here.
Yeah, you should be able to, Phil. There you go.
You guys see that?
Yep, you can see it fine.
So just to start, again, on August 6th of 2024, Governor Healy signed the Affordable Homes Act. This was legislation that authorized just over about $5 billion in spending over the next 5 years. But as part of that were 50 policy initiatives that were included in that legislation, and one of those being the ADU legislation, specifically Section 7 and 8 was amended for the State Zoning Act, which establishes the new AD law and definitions. So Section 7 is the definitions, Section 8 is the actual legislation. So just to kind of give folks a rundown, an accessory dwelling unit can either exist within the primary residence. It's like converting your basement to an apartment. It can also be attached to a primary residence, either by an addition, or if you had an attached garage, you could theoretically convert that to an accessory dwelling unit, or the legislation allows a completely detached dwelling. Assuming you have the square footage and the land to do that, you could build a a cottage or a quote unquote tiny house on your property as well. So those are all included in the ADU legislation. So the new law, the definitions went into effect back in August. The big thing that triggers now is February 2nd of this year. Section 8, which is the legislation, takes effect. The proposed regulations that we have before the City Council on Monday, it's important to note that whether those are adopted by the City Council or not adopted by the City Council, the law allowing the accessory dwelling unit goes into effect on the 2nd of February. The big thing that was part of this legislation is now ADUs are really become a protected use, which, you know, it's similar to religious uses or educational uses, or what many people may know of as the Dover Amendment, which protects those uses. So they've kind of raised the level of what cities and towns can do to regulate accessory dwelling units. The protected uses are all listed in Section 3 of the Zoning Act. Like other protected uses, accessory dwelling units are subject to reasonable regulations at the municipal level, and that reasonable is kind of limited as what can be done to deny these. The big thing is to remember that if an ADU meets the underlying zoning regulations as far as setbacks and lot size and coverage, it's not something that the city is going to be able to deny. So the definition, so the big thing to know is an accessory dwelling unit is a self-contained housing unit. The big thing is it's inclusive of sleeping, cooking, and sanitary facilities. So that's kind of a big one. You know, it's not like you're just throwing a bed in your basement and calling it an accessory dwelling unit. It has to have, you know, sanitary facilities, kitchen facilities in order to be classified as an accessory dwelling unit. And it must maintain a separate entrance, but that's either directly through the outside or through an entry hall or corridor shared with the principal dwelling. There is a limit on how big they can be. It's either half, it can't be larger than half of the gross floor area of the principal building, or 900 square feet. So whichever is smaller. So for instance, if you had a ranch that was 1,000 square feet, your accessory dwelling unit could only be 500 square feet. If you had one smaller, it could be smaller, but the largest you could go was 900 square feet. And then lastly, as it was talking about, you can, the sections do allow restrictions on short-term rentals. So an accessory dwelling unit can't be used as a Airbnb or just a rental, short-term rental. But you know, one of the kind of the larger things is a lot of the surrounding communities allowed accessory dwelling units as part of their zoning. But one of the things that a lot of the surrounding communities had is in order to do an accessory dwelling unit, you had to be an owner occupant. The way the law has been written now, it's no municipality shall unreasonably restrict the creation of a rental or accessory dwelling unit. That's for short-term rental. I'll get onto that. It has to be on the same principal lot too. So if someone had a lot where their house was on, and then they had a side lot that was a separate lot, you couldn't put the accessory dwelling unit on that lot and then ultimately sell it off. The accessory dwelling unit has to be on the principal property and in same ownership. With regards to the owner occupancy of the accessory dwelling unit, the city cannot require that either the principal dwelling be owner occupied or the accessory dwelling unit. So that's a pretty significant change to what a number of communities have done. Springfield at this point has never allowed accessory dwelling units, but other communities have, but that was a key kind of restriction that it had to be owner occupied.
Bill, could you expand on that, what you just said?
Basically, it means that if I have a house, I mean, I don't have to live in it in order to do an accessory dwelling unit. I don't have to be an owner occupied structure in order to do an accessory dwelling unit. So theoretically, I could purchase a home, put an accessory dwelling unit in it, and rent both the house and the accessory dwelling unit to somebody else.
And can the city put a restriction on that, or we can't put it?
No, you cannot require owner occupancy. So here's the actual legislation. This is Article 8, or excuse me, Section 8 of Chapter 40. 40A of the state law. I've kind of highlighted some of the kind of the big parts of the legislation. One of them being that, you know, it starts off by saying that no zoning ordinance or bylaw shall prohibit, unreasonably restrict, or require a special permit or other discretionary zoning approval. And that's the big one, discretionary zoning approval for the use of land or structures for a single accessory dwelling unit. So that's kind of the overriding legislation that kind of governs what cities and towns can do to regulate ADUs. You cannot require them to get special permits, and you cannot add discretionary zoning approval. So it limits the kind of the ability of the city or towns to say no to an accessory dwelling unit. In the legislation, these are only allowed in single-family residential zoning districts. So multifamily, you know, you can't have a 2-family or a 3-family and then add an accessory dwelling unit to it. That is not allowed. It would only be for a single family. It is subject to reasonable regulations, one of those being a site plan review. So the regulations that we've drafted and are put forward before the city council on Monday is basically just allowing the city to do site plan review. It's an administrative site plan review, so it's not, you know, it's not technically an approval. It's just the applicant, and I've got some details on that in a couple slides, but basically they just would submit a plan and it's being verified for compliance with the underlying zoning regulations, but it's not technically an approval. It's just a review to make sure they meet, you know, the dimensional setbacks, bulk height of the structures. So again, just to kind of reiterate what I just said, you know, that lower down in that article, it specifically says that, you know, you shall not require owner occupancy of either the accessory dwelling unit or the principal dwelling. And then the city cannot require any more than one additional parking space for an accessory dwelling unit.
Mhm.
Then if you're within, the way the law speaks, if you're within a half a mile of a railway station, subway station, ferry terminal, bus station, you don't have to provide any additional parking. You know, there's been an interpretation on the city level that bus stops do not classify as a bus station. So we are going to be requiring that people provide an additional parking space. But, you know, I have been to presentations where people argue that bus stop should count too, but we're not interpreting that way at this time. Again, they're only allowed, and you know, if you were doing more than one accessory dwelling unit, which is allowed under this new law, that would trigger the need for a special permit. So if and when somebody wanted to do more than one accessory dwelling unit on their lot, the second one would have to come back to the city council for a special permit approval, and that gives a little more.
Excuse me, Phil, if I may, Councilor Curran, if I may. I have a quick question for you, sir, but before I ask you my question, please allow me to say that this is a joint meeting of the Economic Development and the General Government. Today here in the chambers, we are joined by Councilor Curran, myself, Councilor Davila, Solicitor Bonaconti. We have a former city councilor, my God, I just drew a blank, I'm sorry.
Bill Foley.
Bill Foley, Councilor Allen. Online, we have Councilor Whitfield. We have Councilor Walsh and City Attorney Ken Shea. And Councilor Brown, thank you. Sorry, Councilor Brown. Phil, I just want to be crystal clear of what you just said. If you want to do, the law allows you to have a second accessory unit on your property, correct?
Correct.
And if you do want to have a second one, you do need a special permit from the city council, correct?
Correct. Correct.
And the second unit will still have to conform to the square footage.
Correct.
Up to 900. correct?
As well as all the underlying zoning requirements, you know, your land area, your building footprint, your setbacks, it still would have to
Right.
apply to
Which
that.
leads me to my other question, Phil. Say, for example, somebody wants to make the basement into an apartment. They will have to comply with all the zoning code enforcement requirements, water, sewage, electricity. They will have to have inspections, pass inspection, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody proposing to do one of these accessory dwelling units will absolutely have to obtain all the required permits.
Right. Now, that includes particularly for the basement, an emergency exit.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I mentioned there, it does require a separate entrance, but that can be an internal entrance. I don't think you would actually have to have an entrance out to the door. But again, that may be something that code requires or the building code requires. I'd have to defer to building on that. But the law itself just says, and I can go back to that, you must maintain a separate entrance either directly from the outside or through an entry hall or corridor shared with the principal dwelling unit. So,
Gotcha. Okay,
um,
excellent. I do see some people are putting some questions. Beate, I'm gonna get to your question in a second. Phil, go ahead, continue with your presentation.
well, yeah, so this is just some key aspects to the proposed regulations we have drafted. They were approved by the planning board back on the 8th of January. It's as everyone knows, it's scheduled to be heard by the city council on the 27th. Again, ADUs, they're only going to be allowed in Residence A and Residence A1 zones. Those are single family zoning districts. They're not going to be allowed to be used as short-term rentals. The principal building and the ADU must be in common ownership and be located on the same parcel. So again, you're not going to be able to be later on, if you had the room to build a tiny house, you would not be able to come in and create a parcel and then sell that off as a separate unit. And as just mentioned, all new construction must meet, you know, all state building codes and Springfield building codes and all the underlying zoning setback requirements. So at the end of the day, these ADUs are not going to be cheap to install because you are going to have to install all the, the kitchen equipment and the sewer and water equipment. So it's not to say it won't be done, but I think they're not going to be cheap to do. But and again, as I mentioned, the first ADU is allowed by right, where the city cannot say no to these. But if someone wanted to, had the room to do a second one, it would require a special permit. And then again, all the new ADUs are going to have to meet the dimensional regulations. The big thing that the regulations do, I think the regulations about 3 or 4 pages, but really boils down to that this is just basically implementing a site plan review for these new ADUs, because that's really the only kind of regulatory control that the city can use. And again, this would be an administrative site plan review. So it's not going to go to the planning board or the city council. It's simply an administrative site plan review. The person looking to put one of these in would have to submit a site plan, and it'd have to be drawn by a qualified professional. It'd have to be drawn to scale and show the location and square footage of the existing dwelling and the proposed ADU. The plan should show all the egress points. And then obviously ADUs fully, well, again, the site plan requirements, the setbacks and all that, if you were converting your cellar, for instance, there really are no setback requirements that are going to be triggered through that process. This is really for the site plan review is really more for looking at either a secondary housing development on somebody's property or an addition to a property or the conversion of a garage. Because again, although it's theoretically possible to convert a detached garage into an ADU, most detached garages do not meet the setback requirements for Residence A or Residence A1. Most of them tend to be 3 feet off the property line, where a housing unit needs to be 10. So an attached garage you could, because those will meet the setback requirements, but a detached garage probably won't. It's not to say that there isn't a case where it can, but it's going to be a little more difficult to try and convert a detached garage, but.
Phil, on that point, if you can expand upon that, so if you have a garage, it has to be 10 feet off is it 10 feet off the street? Is that what you're saying?
Well, side yard setback. So most detached garages they're not considered residential structures, so they don't have to meet the 10-foot side yard setback. So most garages you'll find are 3 or 5 feet from the side yard line. So if someone wanted to
From their
convert,
neighbor, you mean?
what was that?
From their neighbor? More than 10
Oh,
feet?
from their side property line. Their neighbor would then, if the neighbor had a garage next to them, that would be 5 feet off of the property line as well. So you'd have probably a total of 10 feet, but it's the side, it's not technically to your neighbor's garage. It's 5 feet from where your property line is, or 3 feet from where your property line is.
Okay.
Just like the rear yard setback in Residence A is 30 feet. So a structure has to be 30 feet off of the rear line. It has to be 25 feet from the front. So there's a number of setback requirements that get triggered with housing new development. So any ADU that's being proposed would have to meet those. But again, if you're just converting an attic, for instance, or a cellar, then you don't really have to worry about your setbacks because you're not expanding the structure.
One question, Phil, on that point that I'm unclear. Could you hypothetically, you have a 1,800 foot square ranch, you convert it into an ADU on both sides, 900, and then also no.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be 2 ADUs. It would be your primary residence and then an ADU.
In an ADU, and then on top of that, could you convert your garage into an ADU? So on one parcel, you have the hypothetically, an 1,800 foot square ranch with one ADU inside, and then an ADU in the garage, as the garage?
With a special permit, they could ask for it. It's whether or not the city council, at that point, the city council has the authority to not approve a second ADU.
But it is under the law as written, it is possible now to take like a ranch and make, instead of one unit, you'd have 3. I mean, that's just is an informational.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically,
City council can approve
I
it.
guess so. Yeah, I mean, because the law specifically says you can have more than one ADU.
Okay. And again, for this informational hearing, that's kind of the information we want to provide, that this is on the table before us.
Yeah.
So that's
really kind of my presentation. I'm happy to answer. Whoops, sorry. I'm happy to answer any questions somebody. I don't know if you want me to leave the presentation up or take it down.
Do you have any, Councilor Curran, you want to?
No. We have other counselors here, and obviously that's a great presentation, Phil. And we appreciate your insight on this. This is again a revolutionary change here for the city, and we're also joined by Tina Quagliardo Sullivan from the City of Housing Department. And we appreciate your joining our subcommittee meeting. But yeah, that's absolutely some interesting points.
I mean, I do see some. I'm happy to try and answer the questions I can in the that I see in the chat.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I mean, the first one is there any consideration given to the historic districts? I mean, the construction in a historic district doesn't change. So if you're converting a basement in a historic district, then the commission doesn't have any control on the interior of a building anyway. But if you were talking about adding to a historic structure or adding a secondary building in a historic structure, it absolutely would have to go through the historical commission. So this doesn't change the review of a local historic district. So if you happen to be building in a local historic district and you're adding onto your house, or you're adding an ADU in your backyard, then you would have to go through all the reviews of the specific district you happen to fall into.
But it
So
does,
Phil, just to follow up on that, Beat, I'm gonna let you go in a second, but Phil, just to follow up on that, so in the historic district, if somebody wants to have an ADU, they will have to have the historic district review. And they will have to, so it is possible to do, but they will have to comply with all the historic district requirements, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But again, that's if they're talking about they want to add an addition. If they're just converting their basement into an ADU, the commission doesn't have any control over interior of a historic building. So
Right.
just like today, if someone was to build, like for instance, on Ingersoll Grove that was just approved, when they come in, they're gonna have to go before the historical commission to build that house. The same as if someone wanted to do an addition or a tiny house in their backyard, they're still gonna have to come before the historical commission and get approvals before that construction can begin.
So we're also joined by Beata Boland, the president of the Forest Park Civic Association, and Jane Hetzel from the Forest Park Civic Association. Beata, you had a question?
My hand is up, Counselor, and usually we give consideration to the
I
counselors first.
apologize, Councilor Whitfield, you're absolutely correct. I apologize, we did not see you. But yes, it's gonna be Councilor Whitfield, followed by Beata Boland. Go ahead, Councilor Whitfield.
Thank you. I just wanted to just add that these are state laws, so when it comes to the city council vote, we have to follow the state laws. It's not gonna say, we can't say, well, we're gonna take out this part of the state law and change this part of the state law. The state law is the guidance that we have to follow. So I just wanted to make that point clear that a lot of what Phil presented are state laws. It is not up to the city council to determine or take out some of the laws that were presented by Phil that are mandated by the state. So I just kind of wanted to say that because I know people are going to be like, can we not do this and can we do that? But if it's mandated by the state law, there are things that we just do not have control over. That's all I wanted to say, Counselor. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Councilor Whitfield. Beata?
But I have questions too.
I'm sorry, yes, Councilor Walsh.
Thank you. Thank you, chairs, for having this meeting. You know, one of the things I wondered was about neighborhood councils. They usually get involved when we have special permits or zone changes. They're not going to have any authority over ADUs, right?
No, no. I mean, that's kind of the straightforward answer is no. It's the same with the butters. It's not a, I don't, I hate to be
Huge
blunt, but well, I mean, but again, a lot of the housing communities consider this the same as building a single family house, which doesn't require notification. So this law was kind of drafted by a number of the housing advocates who are trying to provide additional housings in the state. You can argue about whether that's right or wrong, but there's a lot of folks who believe that ADUs are great uses and should be allowed as it is now by right. There's others that argue it impacts neighborhoods. Again, I think it's kind of a wait to see of how this ultimately impacts neighborhoods. I certainly think there's a possibility that it may if everybody runs out and starts doing this. But again, I do think cost is going to come into play because these are not going to be cheap to do. But to let everybody know, I have gotten a number of calls already from folks. Oh yeah, looking to can I convert my garage? Can I convert my basement? So so the building department and myself have gotten a number of calls already for people looking to do this. So I do think.
What about people's tax assessment? Is this going to impact it?
Well, I mean, again, I'm not the assessors, but I would think if you add an additional unit, you're going to be taxed on that. I would think. I'd have to defer to the assessor's office, but it's going to be considered rental income, I would think. But I don't want to overstep I would think you would, just like a two-family, if you're assessed as a single family versus a two-family. But because you are going to be assessed, I think I would assume you're going to now be assessed as a.
And my last concern is I think it'd be very tricky if you live in a historic district and you want to put in an ADU. And
Well, but it's the same as someone wanted to add to their kitchen, you know, if they wanted to add an addition to make their kitchen bigger, you could come in and ask and request to
no, but
expand.
I think it's gonna be tricky if people.
Well, yeah, it's not gonna be easy, but I don't think it's impossible. I think if someone wants to add an addition to a historic home, they're just gonna have to make it look like part of the house.
Mhm. Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before Beate, just give me a second. Does any councilor have any questions, before I get to Beate? In chambers, Councilor Allen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Is there any precedent, any other communities or, you know, towns in Massachusetts, cities or towns that have challenged this or that have added a contingency or something or a condition that we should contemplate? And has there been any success in modifying this at all?
Not that I'm aware of. You know, I just read an article, I forget which town it is, Belchertown maybe, or no, I think Belchertown always allows ADUs, but I think most of the communities that don't allow these now are going specifically by what the state laws, and there's actually the executive office of I forget the full name of it, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities actually drafted a kind of a zoning draft that a number of communities are using. We had drafted ours prior to them doing that. It's pretty similar. Theirs is a little more geared toward the ADU by right. And again, you know, depending on who you talk to, some people say that you shouldn't even require a site plan review. I don't think requiring a site plan review is onerous. And it does give the city a chance to just review these, but there's some who would argue you don't need that either. So, but I don't believe, you know, I have heard that there may be some filing of some amendments to the law, but I don't know when that's going to happen and how long that will affect. Again, the big thing that I keep pointing out is February 2nd, this goes into effect. So if we don't have site plan review in place, then it's not going to stop somebody from doing it. They're just simply going to walk to the building department and go through whatever process the building department does. By having the site plan review, it just means they come to the planning department and fill out an application on a site plan. It again isn't an opportunity to say, no, you can't do this. It's just simply an additional review, but the law itself goes into effect in February.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks.
Beate, go ahead.
So this sounds to me like it will fundamentally redefine residential in Springfield. They'll all become R1s by definition, right? Because if multifamilies are allowed, it's no longer single family residential. I mean, it's a fundamental change in our zoning, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you couldn't do this without this law, that's for sure. But you know, it's not a true two-family. You know, they are certainly smaller units, but you know, again, I think you know, again, there are surrounding communities that have allowed ADUs and have been, you know, what impact that's had to those communities, I don't know off the top of my head, but so ADUs are not they're not a brand new use. There's been they used to be known as like the in-law apartment and so the big difference with this is, you know, there really is no longer an in-law. It's whoever you want to happen to rent it to. But again, ADUs have been around, so they're not a new use, and some communities I'm sure will tell you that they have not been an issue.
Do you have a follow-up, Beate?
Well, I don't think you've actually answered the question. We are doing away with residential by allowing this, right? All
Oh, Well, you're
all
not doing away
residents
with,
are now permitted to put in a second dwelling, which makes it multifamily by definition. I just want to clarify that we're doing away with residential by implementing this law.
well, well, I'm
I'm-
not sure
I'm-
I wholeheartedly agree with that, but,
Well, okay,
because I'm not sure every house is going to suddenly become an accessory dwelling unit. I think there's gonna be plenty of neighborhoods where the guy living next to you is not planning to do an ADU. So I'm not sure that suddenly every single family dwelling in Springfield is all gonna now be two-family. I don't. But could it?
But to be clear, Phil, I think to what you said earlier, this is a law that was passed by the state legislature that we have no real control over implementation or not. Is that accurate?
That's 100% accurate. I mean, again, it's the same that for folks that, neighborhoods that have been impacted by group homes, once they trigger that Dover amendment, then the zoning is gone. So, and the only way that that's going to change is at the state level. This is not a city initiated law. So as Councilor Whitfield had said, that the law is written, the law is passed, and the law is coming. So,
Phil, thank you, Mayor. I feel I do have some questions for you, but before I ask, I got two specific questions. But before I get to that, I want to give the time to the neighborhood residents. I do believe Jane had a question perhaps, and his owner, Phil Conton, I believe. Jane, did you have a question? And then followed by Richie Allen. Jane, did you have a question, ma'am?
I think she's muted. Jane.
Jane, you might be muted. You might be-
Sorry, no, I don't have a question at this
Okay.
time.
Mr. Conton, did you have a question, sir?
I think Phil is gone.
Mr.
No,
Conton?
I'm here.
Oh, no, Phil Conton.
Oh, Phil Conton.
The other Phil.
All right.
The judge.
I have a question.
Okay, Councilor Walsh followed by, Richie Allen. Councilor Walsh.
Phil, are there restrictions on design? Or can someone just add whatever they want? Especially if there's no review? Or,
Yeah, I mean, the only design review would be if you happen to be in an historic district.
All right, thank you, Councilor Walsh. Richie Allen?
I'm not sure what that is. That accessory dwelling unit guidebook up?
Oh, I'm sorry, Phil, are you still answering the question or did you?
No.
Okay, Richie Allen, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it may evolve into a question, but a couple of comments. I think the point that this is state law is well taken. This is something that is imposed on all cities and towns. And it's incumbent on, planning departments across the Commonwealth, like such as Phil, to faithfully comply within the parameters established by the state law as to how to best protect, each city and town for which they're responsible. So I welcome, the planning department's proactive approach here. And I would urge the council to consider strongly having this approved either in the form presented by the planning department or whatever amendment, but certainly in advance of February 2nd, so that there are some controls in place before the law becomes effective. I would note that there are over 26,000 single-family homes in Springfield. And one of the Springfield strengths as the city of homes traditionally has been that it's been able to provide plentiful housing at various income and socioeconomic status levels. Springfield has remained an attractive community for middle-class households because of its single-family zoning and its historic districts and large lots and diversity of housing stock. And I guess I'm just very concerned that, that with the ADUs, of right, as modified by whatever regulations are approved, that, Springfield's, stability and tradition as a place for, for middle-class families, to, uh, to own and raise families and so forth. But that's somewhat vulnerable now, somewhat in question now. And I'll just draw on some knowledge. So in my prior position, single-family values in Springfield were always about 1/2 of the total taxable value. So it almost without fail, it was within 49, 50, 51% that the total single-family value across all those 26,000 plus single families comprise 1/2 of the total taxable value in Springfield. Not just residential, all the value, commercial, industrial, personal, and residential. So that's a critical factor to consider. And I think, what Phil and the planning department staff has done here is commendable. But I think the energies and focus really should turn to the local legislative delegation, and consider some ways of mitigating the potential impact here on middle class gateway cities like Springfield. And so anyways, I guess I don't have a question right now, but I think Phil's been very thorough in preparing these regulations, and I would just urge the council to approve those, or whatever amendments may apply, but make sure that happens before February 2nd, so there's some control. Thank you.
Councilor Curran, followed by Councilor Ford.
Just to follow up with Mr. Allen's comments, as well as Tina Sullivan's comments. Yeah, I think we are all aware that this is a state law that is going to be mandated on the city. But we do have the opportunity to prepare, and at least outreach to city residents to let them, inform them that this is coming. So my question is, like in the housing department, Ms. Sullivan, has Jerry McCafferty, has she had meetings with the neighborhood councils on accessory dwelling units and their impact here in the city of Holmes? And we have on the screen, I downloaded accessory dwelling unit guidebook for the city of Boston, and that's a 100-page manual on how to construct these things properly so they don't have a detrimental impact in the Boston neighborhoods. Does the housing department here in the city of Springfield, do we have a manual such as this for our residents and for developers? And what is our progress on this? Or can city of Springfield residents simply download what the city of Boston residents are going to be using? But it seems to me that this is a major thing coming. We all know that in a month. But is the city housing department prepared for it with a guidebook such as this? And what is our outreach measures to the neighborhood councils? And
Yeah.
is Jerry McCrafty available, our housing director, today? Is she for this meeting?
Okay, so let me try to answer your questions one by one. Firstly, the neighborhood councils actually fall under my purview, myself and Ed Whitley. So Jerry doesn't really have any interaction with them on a regular basis. Phil did loop the neighborhood councils in on the accessory dwelling unit law that's forthcoming. He did send the information that he's brought to you all to them for review. He also is going to be presenting to them next month at the annual neighborhood council dinner to sort of make sure that they're all up to speed on what's coming. As far as I know, Phil, have you prepared any sort of guidebook or anything along those lines that Councilor Curran's asking for? No, okay.
I do
Yeah.
not. I mean, again, the law was passed in August. We rushed as quickly as we could to get this done. I don't know that accessory dwelling guidebook. I'm not even sure I'd have to look at the date on that, whether that even complies with the state law anymore. So we don't have I mean, again, all I can say is somebody doing an accessory dwelling unit is going to have to follow all the building codes and zoning regulations in the city.
Yeah,
We do
so
not have a
we,
guideline.
we're happy to take a look at this and see if this is something that we could mirror. But we'll definitely take a look at that. As to your question about Jerry's availability today, Jerry is not available. She had a pre-scheduled conflict with the meeting. We weren't quite sure. I didn't receive notice of the meeting. We weren't quite sure if we were supposed to be here or not. We did reach out to the council office to see if there was pending legislation about the minimum dwelling unit size. But as far as we knew, there wasn't draft language there. And so when someone from the council just reached out to Jerry, she reached out to see if I could come in her absence.
We appreciate your attendance, but certainly anything with accessory dwelling units in the future, oh, absolutely. The Director of Housing is invited, as it's probably the most consequential piece of legislation they had in the last 5 years that I know of. So that's an open invitation at all times. Beyond that, is there any special forms here that so it's coming in a month, Phil, or for permits or for contractors? Is there what's the notification to the city when these are done? Is there a special, does the city are we prepared to have ADU forms?
I've drafted, we have an administrative site plan application already for a number of uses that have to go through it. So I have tweaked that for an accessory dwelling unit. So there will be an application. If someone goes to the building department to pull a permit, they'll send them back down to us, where they'll have to go through the administrative site plan approval prior to the issuance of a building permit.
So there is a differential. So if an electrician comes in and pulls a permit for electric, we know that it's not simply he's doing work in the basement, but that it's for an ADU. Is that kind of, am I correct on that or incorrect? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I would assume so. I mean, again, I don't have control over the building permit, but the building will not issue a building permit for an accessory dwelling unit, which I'm assuming on the building application, they're going to have to qualify that they're looking for an accessory dwelling unit. Because I think even the building guys are going to know that they're adding, it's a single family house that they're adding another unit to. So they're going to.
For clarification, that's the question. I mean, are we going to will the city have notification that, let's say, hypothetically, somebody from Boston buys a ranch out in 16 acres and they start pulling permits that they're not just doing remodeling, that it's an ADU. Is there a system that we're going to monitor where the ADUs are being built and that kind of, what type of planning is done in that? And I understand you're not building, you're not in charge of the building department either, but do we have that system in place yet?
Well, I'm going to say yes, because when someone comes in for a building permit, they're going to have to distinguish what they're doing for that building permit. It's either going to be a kitchen renovation or an accessory dwelling unit. So yes, and then I noticed one of the questions before, inspections for all the electrical, plumbing, all that will have to be done just as if you were building a new house. And then a certificate of occupancy will not be issued until all the inspections have been completed. So these accessory dwelling units are going to go through the same building permit process as any other dwelling unit in the city or any other remodeling. There's checks and balances and safeguards that people are. That's not to say someone's going to do it without permits, but if they're going through the building department, they're going to have to go through all the required permits and inspections for an accessory dwelling unit.
Any other questions, Councilor Curran?
I don't know.
Thank you, Councilor Curran. Also, Phil, I do have three questions for you, but before I get to my question, I want to give Mr. Latorre an opportunity to ask a question. Mr.
I'm sorry,
Latorre?
my hand was up before Mr. Latorre, and I don't know if you can't see it because it's dark hand, Counselor.
Councilor Whitfield, you're correct. I didn't see it, not
Okay.
because it's dark, excuse me, it's not because it's a dark hand. It's just because I have like 40 things going at once. So my apologies to you.
Okay.
Councilor Whitfield, if in the future I neglect you, I am not neglecting you purposely. I have a lot of things going
No,
on
I
here.
know,
Go ahead, Councilor
I
Whitfield,
understand.
and then followed by.
I just wanted, no problem. I just wanted to say, I want to give Phil a little bit of grace because Phil is not over the building department. So I would strongly urge that the head of building, Steve Desolates, come to our city council meeting. So those specific questions, just in case Phil is assuming that everything is in place, but in the instance that they're not, we should be hearing that from the building department. Things that are in Phil's control, like zone changes and things like that, is what we should be asking Phil. But other than that, when it has to do with the legal side, the law department should be here. And I do see Attorney Ken Shea here when it has to do with building and building permits and things like that. We definitely should have the building department here, and I know that they were invited, but not here. And so I would strongly urge that they do attend our city council meeting so we can ask those specific type of questions and not put so much of that pressure on Phil. He does the best he can, put that presentation together, told us what the law is, and it is the law that we have to abide by. I know people aren't going to be happy about it. I'm not happy about certain aspects of it myself. But it is the law and we have to follow the law. So I just wanted to encourage not to put that type of pressure on the departments that are not here. I also want to thank Tina for coming because she is very knowledgeable about the housing department and what goes on over there, and to take the time out of her schedule, which it was a last minute ask to be here, is very admirable. And thank you for coming because you are knowledgeable when it comes to housing. So I just wanted to say those 2 points really quickly, and we do encourage that Jerry McCafferty and Steve Desolates be at the city council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor, and I will certainly bring the council's request also back to Tim Sheehan, who oversees the division.
Thank you, Councilor Curran, followed by Mr. Latorre.
Yeah, I certainly echo City Councilor Tracy Whitfield's comments there as well. To Phil, and I don't know if you have the answer for this, if this might be more of a building inspector, building department question, but are there going to be additional fees for people who pull out ADU permits? Obviously, this is going to create a lot of excitement, I'm sure, especially for Boston developers to come to Springfield to convert some houses to ADUs. Are we at least some way to raise some revenue out of this? Will there be an additional separate fee for electric, water, and whatnot, in addition to the regular construction? And I know you're planning and not building code enforcement, Steve Destel's department, but is that on the table possibly?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can only tell you that there is no additional fee for the administrative site plan review process that I complete. You know, I'd have to defer to building. I'm assuming they're gonna have their regular fees, but I don't know whether they're gonna be additional fees for an ADU. I'd have to.
And another unanswerable question for you, Phil, but you are, or even Tina Q. I mean, just the enormity of this legislation and impact on Springfield. I mean, would this entail like an entire department? I know in the city of Boston, they have an entire ADU department now. Is that going to be something that we're going to have to undertake, or is it kind of like we're going to just go with the flow and see what happens? Or like, what would be your anticipation, Phil and or Tina?
Well, I mean, again, to me, I think at this point, it's going to be a more of a wait and see to see. I mean, if 500 of these come in, then that's going to be a different animal. But it's hard to say how many people are going to run out and do this. There may be a whole bunch waiting, but that's until we kind of get an idea of and grasp of what the impact these are and how many are actually going to happen. It's hard to tell. I mean, I from my side, the administrative site plan review is not onerous, and I work with building to go through that. So But obviously if 300 show up on my counter, then that's a whole different ballgame, but I'd have to, I think it's more of a wait and see.
Very well. Any other question, Councilor Carr? No. Councilor Allen?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Phil, I don't know if it's Phil or whomever, if two people come in from the same street and one wants to put an addition, traditional addition on their house, redo their kitchen or whatever, and somebody, their next door neighbor or a couple houses away wants to do an ADU, would it be basically the same process for them, but there would be fees for one, but not for the other? I know that's not your area.
No, I mean, if somebody is doing just an addition to their house, they wouldn't have to go through a site plan review from me, but they would have to go through all the building permits and fees for an addition, whether it's for an ADU or you're expanding your kitchen.
Right.
But just by doing an ADU, the other person on the street doing an ADU would go through the administrative site plan.
Yeah, if they are doing an ADU, that would trigger an administrative site plan review. If they're just doing an addition to their house, they would do whatever the reviews the building department requires for setbacks, but it wouldn't trigger a review from planning.
Would there be fees involved in the traditional addition?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So would it make sense for there to be fees involved in this?
Well, there are. I didn't mean to say that. There certainly are going to be fees for the construction of an ADU, whether that's an interior one or an addition. All the, the electrical permit fees, all the fees associated with new construction is going to kick in for an ADU or an addition.
Okay.
I'm not sure there's going to be additional fees for an ADU, but all the standard building costs and fees will certainly apply.
Right.
And what other situation, in residential, in a homeowner situation, single homeowner or otherwise, would there be fees from your department? Or what else would trigger an administrative site plan review?
Well, in residential, it's strictly kind of limited to, years ago, before the zoning was updated in 2013, you used to have a list of owner occupancy uses, doctors, dentists, lawyers. We changed that to basically allow home occupancy, but based on the impact. So for instance, if someone wanted to use their house in a residential district for a hairdresser, if they have more than 2 or 3 people coming a day, it may trigger an administrative site plan review versus someone who's just doing if you were just doing a tax in your home and you had nobody coming to your house, there is no review. But if you have people coming to your house, which is allowed in residential districts for home-based businesses, depending on the impact that business has, it may trigger an administrative site plan review just to verify that they're, to get exactly how many people are coming. And because there's certain, once you're over a certain number of people, then, you can't turn your house into a business, but you are allowed to have a number of people come to your house and I throw out hairdresser. That's kind of the easiest one.
All right. Any question, Councilor Allen?
No, all set. Thank you.
Before we start wrapping up, to move into the second portion of the meeting, which is talking about new construction and minimum square feet, before I ask my question, I want to give a chance to Mr. Latorre to ask his question. Then Phil and Solicitor will have a quick question for you guys. Latorre, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple questions for Mr. Jerome, some clarifying ones. Phil, could someone build an ADU by adding another floor to their house? Is there a limit on the height of a home in a residential A district? Yeah,
there is limitations. There are hard. I don't have them off the top of my head. I think it might be 35. Yeah, 30 feet or I don't know. So
yeah, I was thinking like 35 feet or something.
Yeah,
like that.
I'd have to look at the zoning. But so yes, you are limited. But could somebody put in a second floor on their home? Sure. Or if you had an attached garage, could you add a second story and put an ADU above that? Yeah.
Right. So that was the first thing, just to kind of say, you know, we're not going to have a situation where someone could build a 60-foot tall home in a residential neighborhood. The second question I had was, one thing I liked about your proposal was that I think the way you word it is that the planning board has the option to say, if you want to build an ADU, you have to provide an additional parking space. How exactly might that look? Like, for example, if you had a house in Res A and there was already enough parking for, say, 4 cars on the existing driveway, and someone wanted to build an ADU, what might the planning board, require it, if they said they wanted to have an additional parking space? I'm trying to think, like, you could have someone who has space for 6 cars, but there's only one person living in the house.
Well, yeah.
And at the same time, you might need that extra space. So how does that work?
Yeah, but first of all, I just want to clarify, it's not going to be the planning board. It's going to be the administrative site plan review. So the planning board.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So, but
Got it.
again, the parking is kind of a tricky one. If a single family house, again, I'd have to check the zoning. You're only required, I think, to have, even a 2-family, I think, is only required by zoning to have 3. So if you had a driveway that could hold 6 cars, to me, adding an accessory dwelling unit to that, you've met your parking requirement. It's more
Okay.
of the houses that are on the smaller lots that have a single space that are going to be a little tougher to do. But if you have a significant driveway, then to me the parking is not going to be a deciding factor for most of these.
Okay. That makes sense. And Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I'll just ask one more question. I'll be all set. Thank you so much. Phil, last question. Since they can only be installed on the side of the house or the back of the house, is it fair to say that if someone was to successfully petition for an ADU on the side of the house, it would have to be a situation where a house had a very large existing side yard, because you still have some of the side yard setback requirements?
Oh, absolutely. So if someone wants to
Okay.
put it on the side of their structure, they're absolutely going to have to meet their side yard setback. The same with the
So you're not
rear.
gonna
If
have
they
it-
want,
yep.
if they want, if they
Right.
currently only have a 30-foot rear setback, they're not you're not going to be able to add an addition to the rear of the property because you're not going to meet the setback. So again, any new ADU that's talking about adding an addition is going to have to meet the underlying zoning requirements for side yard setback and rear yard setback.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. Like, where I grew up in East Forest Park, the house, and I don't know if that's Res A or not, but I grew up on Ellsworth Avenue. The houses are very close together. You couldn't build an ADU and suddenly be right up against your property line and against the fence.
No,
so
you're not going to be
that's
allowed
good to
to.
know.
Yeah, you're not going to be allowed to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, councilors.
Before I get to Councilor Foley, if I may ask my question, this question is for you, Phil, or Solicitor, if I may. And I realize this might be a question more for Assessor Greenhall, but assessing these new properties with ADUs, I'm sure the property value is going to go up. So I guess my 2 questions are, if you guys want to fight it out over who's going to answer this question. How is it, one, going to impact the overall housing market in that area if people start putting ADUs? Is it going to go up? I know I'm kind of asking you to look into a crystal ball. Suddenly, are the houses going to be more expensive in a very challenging market? And 2, how do we assess them? Do we have the capacity to assess them quickly so that the city does not leave money on the table by means of taxing the property? So whoever wants to fight it out, feel free. Don't jump out once.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure I could tackle the taxing issue. Again, I think they're just going to be assessed as an additional unit. So I'd have to defer to assessors. With regards to the first, I would think, and again, I'm kind of guessing here that your house is certainly gonna probably be a little more expensive if you could show you've got a legal accessory dwelling unit in it, so that allows the purchaser to have rental income if they wanted to, or theoretically their in-laws. So I would think having an accessory dwelling unit in a house is gonna make it more,
Yeah.
more valuable. That's just my opinion.
Very well. Very well. So I'm going to leave the last question for this section to Councilor Foley. Then we're gonna move into the second part. Councilor Foley?
Thank you, Councilor Davila, and Councilor Kern for having the meeting. Bill, one of the concerns is, and I think the representative of the Forest Park Civic Association expresses the concerns of people throughout the city. And this is a program, I think the governor has said that is important in providing more housing for people in need in the state. And I think it's worth a try. But the concern that I have is if it's my neighborhood and someone owns the house and has paid $300, $350 for it, and they put someone in, they're gonna watch it, they're gonna take care of it. The concern that I have, and I've always had, and I think everybody in the room is aware of it, the absentee landlords, okay? There is a great concern about having someone own 3 or 4 houses or 2 houses and not be there when they put the people in, and not supervising the people. Now, I have one state rep who is considering filing legislation to that effect of not having absentee landlords right now, because of the need for people to feel at least in their neighborhood that it is private ownership and doing it. I was hoping, first of all, to ask the council if there could be some legislation filed to look at that, to put some restrictions on absentee landlords. And also, Phil, is there any restrictions on absentee landlords doing this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't disagree with you. But unfortunately, as I showed in my presentation, the law is pretty specific about saying in the legislation that you cannot require owner occupancy of either the primary building or the accessory dwelling unit. So the only way that that gets changed is through a change at the state level. That's now in 40C, the state zoning law. So that's not something I tend to agree. I think accessory dwelling units would probably be more successful if they're owner occupied, but unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you're looking at it, the state specifically put language in the law that says you cannot require that.
Okay, well, I thank you, and I know that, but I'm just wondering if, and again, I would ask the city councilors to consider some type of resolve to have the state legislators look at this more, because I really think that there's concern, not just in Springfield, but it's going to be all over the state about this, and people worried about their neighborhoods and what can happen from this. So I would ask the city council to look into that and talk to state representatives and senators to try and look at that situation and try and get as much home ownership involved in this with limiting absentee landlords. We have 53 in our neighborhood. They're mostly renting out to college students. And thank God for the people at Western New England College who actually supervise the kids in the homes because they go to school there. But there is concerns about absentee landlords not watching their property as well as they should.
Yeah, I guess I don't disagree with that.
Thank you, Councilor Foley. Let's move on to the second portion.
Councilor Davila, before you move on, if I may say, both former councilor.
Tina, can you make it? I'm gonna do a quick time check. It's 2:06.
Sure.
If you could wrap it up in about 30 seconds, I want to move on to the second part. Go ahead, Tina, and then Councilor Kern.
I just wanted to say to former Counselor Foley and to Counselor Curran's concerns, we have heard from several neighborhood councils who have raised the same concerns that former Counselor Foley has brought up. So it's not a unique concern.
And they all vote, right?
Thank you, Tina. So moving on, to new construction minimum square feet, Councilor Curran.
Yes, just briefly, because I know this meeting's running long. I am in the process of submitting an ordinance to create some standards and minimums for new construction. And we're debating whether it's 450 square feet or 500 square feet. This ordinance got its start about 2 years ago. Developers came into a city hall meeting and they received a special permit to put up 36 units of about, which was described to the council as 1-bedroom units, but they were in the range of 275 square feet. And obviously we have a housing crisis, but the fact that we have a housing crisis needs to be balanced by, we need to create housing that provides the occupants with some level of habitability and humanity. And so basically the 500 square feet minimal for new construction was put on the agenda simply to begin that conversation with our planning department and our housing department. I don't want to put forward legislation that'll have a chilling effect on new development, but I also want to implement standards, again, that would mirror what they have in the city of Boston, where a studio apartment has to be around 450 square feet. They have a new apartment. If you wanted to have an apartment less than 450 square feet, they have a term, a micro apartment, and you have to apply for these things. And so as city councilors, when developers who are very frequently in front of us describe their developments as 1-bedroom apartments, that we have some kind of guidepost, that we know what we're voting for. We don't want to vote for units of 275 square feet that are not hospitable for families. And really, to be quite honest with you, are smaller than a hotel room of 400 square feet. And is that really the direction the city wants to go? I don't think it is. I don't think that's housing that really is humane, and that we need to have some standards, because we are going to have a lot of money and a lot of tax cuts coming through for the next 10 years. And so I just wanted to put that 500 square foot minimum as a starting point in this conversation. But we did again invite Mr. Destel of Code Enforcement. He is not here. Jerry McCaffrey's not here. So I think we'll schedule another date for that meeting. But I want to thank former city officials who did show up. We got Councilor Foley. We had former city councilor Judge Content, and with former city assessor Richie Allen. So but just to let you guys know that's coming. So thank you very much for everyone. This is a good first step.
Thank you.
Lets the citizens of Springfield know the ADUs are coming. And this is a major change for the city of Holmes. So I think a revolutionary change. And I think we need to do a little bit of work on our guidebook here and a little bit of work on our outreach to the residents, as this is going to affect each and every one of us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think, I believe Councilor Shea had a comment, followed by Mr. Latour, I believe.
Yeah, I probably should know the answer to this, but I don't. Maybe Phil, are the setback lines on lots determined by the city, or are they determined by the state? My thought being that if they're determined by the city, we, at least the council, I would think, would have authority to adjust those lines, and maybe we could modify or reduce the number of these units, or give a little control to a neighborhood if we had that ability, as long as it was done within reason.
They're under the city zoning requirements. The only thing you got to be careful of is, if you change the side setback, it's going to affect, a single family house too, not just an ADU. So whether or not you could put additional setback requirements for ADUs, I think I'd have to defer to the law department about whether.
I don't think we could do that.
Yeah, so again, could you change the setback? Sure, but that's gonna apply to all new development. So if you go to 20 feet, you're gonna knock out a lot of lots in Springfield that are even buildable.
Okay, just a question.
Thank you, Councilor Shea. Attorney Shea. Mr. Latour, did you have a question, sir? Is that a no?
I think he's muted.
Are you muted, Mr. Latour? Because I wanna.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was double
Before
muted.
jumping
No, I
out,
don't
the
have any
nail is here
questions.
to go, but I have one quick question. So let's give you 5 more minutes, everybody, before we go. Do you have a question you could ask quickly?
No, I don't have any other questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
So my final, I guess I have the final question of the day. So Phil, I see that this issue ADU is on the agenda for February 27th. Can you tell?
January, isn't it?
January.
Sorry, January 27th, thank you. Just coming up next week.
Which is Monday.
Yeah, Monday of next week. So what specifically are we doing on Monday? We're voting this in? Is that what we need to do as a city?
Well, yeah, what I've put before the city council is the amendment to the zoning ordinance to add a section specifically for accessory dwelling units. So it basically, again, kind of goes over where they can go, what size they can be, what districts they're allowed in. And the kind of the main point of the regulations is it would trigger the fact that they need a site plan review. So this is actually a change to the zoning ordinance, so it has to go through that zone change process. So it went to the planning board in earlier in the month, and now it comes to you guys for ultimate approval. But again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, you know, they're limited in scope for as far as being able to control ADUs, but you know, whether or not the city council passes this legislation or amends it, you know, you certainly can amend it but you know, the overall ADU legislation goes into effect on February.
Thank you, Phil. So just to finish up, I have this solicitor is going to contact my own solicitor.
I apologize for continuing this meeting, but I have, Phil, this is kind of probably a question that we should know in the law department, but forgive my ignorance. As a zoning amendment to the city's code, can this be passed with 1 reading or will it require 2 readings? And I ask that question because obviously we're trying to sneak it under the timeline of February 2nd when the state law becomes effective.
Well,
so I guess, you know what the answer is?
Well, I've kind of gone back and forth. I think it used to be a 2-step, but recently it's been a 1-step. But what's important to note as far as once an amendment to the zoning is advertised, which this has been, it was supposed to be heard back in December. The ordinance technically is in effect. So someone can't run into and get an ADU on the 2nd and not go through the site plan review process. So technically the ordinance is in effect until the city council either amends it or votes it does not approve it. So that at least part is covered. But I believe it can be passed in a 1-step. But I'd have to defer to Ken on, you know, I've been here for a while and it used to be 1 and 2 steps and then it went to 1. And so I've been kind of confused on that as well.
Ken, did you want to comment on that?
I guess I have the same opinion as the solicitors. I wouldn't be sure. I know there's a number of things we can do at the council where we can do 1st and 2nd step at the first meeting. So that may allow us, along with the advertising, to be covered.
Yeah, I believe that has been done too. I know if you're changing the city ordinance, it's certainly a 3-step process. I just don't know about the zoning.
All right, thank you, Phil. So this is brand new to all of us. There will be more meetings regarding this issue. I will consult with my colleague, Councilor Curran, as to the next steps are. But I thank everybody for joining us today. This is going to be on the schedule on the agenda for January 27th, next Monday. With that being said, the time is now 2:16. I'm adjourning the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a good day. God bless.